Good morning. I'm Alan Merton, president of George Mason University. On behalf of our 33,000 students and 6,000 employees, I welcome you to George Mason. Today is an opportunity for discussions that lead to a better understanding of the role of the private sector working with the federal government in so many exciting ways, particularly directed to the issues associated with procurement. A few words about George Mason University. There are many things that make us go, but the two things that are probably most important to us. One is we believe we are and we continue to be a very innovative and entrepreneurial university. We think it's important that not only we tell our students to be innovative and entrepreneurial, but that we as the leaders of the university are that as well. Secondly, we take advantage of our location. We strongly believe in location, location, location. Some 14 years ago in my inaugural talk, I said that George Mason University shouldn't try to be excellent at anything that doesn't either directly draw upon or contribute to the greater Washington, D.C. area. What we're doing today, what's happening today at George Mason with your participation, is an opportunity for us at George Mason University to share our facilities, to share what we are with the important parts of the community that you represent. This has been an exciting summer for George Mason. Most summers are exciting, this one a little bit more than normal. At our Prince William campus, we opened the 1,100-seat Performing Arts Center. The most exciting thing about the Performing Arts Center is a joint project of the City of Manassas, the County of Prince William, the state, and George Mason University. It's an example of what the kinds of things we can do when we as a university partner with the communities around us. Secondly, in Prince William, we opened a biomedical research laboratory. We do a lot of work in the area of biodefense, and with the help of the former Governor Warner, we were able to attract large NIH grants that now allow us to build a major facility that studies issues associated with biodefense and infectious diseases. We are now in the soft opening phase of the Mason Inn Hotel and Conference Center, about a 5-minute walk from where we are today. This is a 150-room hotel with over 20,000 square feet of conference facility. Gives us an opportunity to not only service the needs of our faculty and their students and their families, but also the community. So these are truly exciting activities at George Mason University. Being innovative and taking advantage of our location are primarily important to us. There are a lot of people who have made a difference in this institution over its relatively short period of time, only some 38 years old. Two individuals that have clearly made a difference during the period of time that I've been at George Mason University are Tom Davis and Mark Warner. These two people know how to make things happen. These two people know how to build a community and the relationship between the federal government and institutions in ways that are just far beyond people's expectation. When I go around the country and around the world and talk about what Tom and what Mark have done, not only for the community, but for specific aspects of the community, the response I get from other university presidents is, "You're lucky, you're lucky, you're lucky," and I really strongly believe that. You're going to have an opportunity to hear today from Mark and from Tom, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Warner. Husband, father, businessman, political organizer, philanthropist, governor, senator, statesman, patriot, Senator Mark Warner.
Wow, well, thank you, President Merton, for that very generous introduction. If you thought that was a good introduction, you ought to have heard how he introduced me when I was governor and I used to write the state budget. But let me again commend my dear friend Alan Merton and thank him and George Mason for letting us use their world-class facilities to host this conference. I think Alan mentioned the fact that George Mason, in terms of kind of university life, is still a very young place, 38 years old. And I think for many of us who've kind of spent most of our careers here in Northern Virginia, to have seen the evolution of this institution from kind of a dream branch of originally UVA, and then becoming kind of a standalone commuter school, to now where I think U.S. News and World Report ranked GMU as the #1 up-and-coming university nationally. And that is a great tribute to George Johnson and to the president for the last almost, how long now? 14 years, Alan. Boy, Alan Merton. So, Alan, congratulations. Job well done. Let me do a couple of housekeeping thanks. As the sponsor of this conference, I want to thank the agencies that sent representatives here to answer your contracting and procurement questions. And for those of you, we set this up so that we had that kind of social hour up front where you got a chance to see the agencies directly. They will be back after the 2 moderated sessions. So if you didn't get a chance to talk to that particular agency and get your questions answered, their representatives will be back. I want to also thank our panelists, who I hope will give you a little bit of insight into at least their views of the current state of federal government contracting. I want to thank Carlos Del Toro, who is a longtime personal friend of mine and whose actual idea it was to sponsor this conference today. And while I will give him a more formal introduction, an introduction that candidly he doesn't need in front of at least this group, I want to thank my good friend Tom Davis as well for being willing to be the keynote speaker. These are challenging times. It's been Tom and I were visiting this morning. I said it's been an interesting transference for me from being a business guy in the private sector to being a CEO as governor, to where I used to be called as Excellency, the governor of the Commonwealth, and you all would have to stand up when I came into the room, to now being the junior senator in a place that is sometimes a little bit dysfunctional. And that is a polite description of where I work right now. And I've never seen a place where, particularly with our country with so many enormous issues in front of us, and Tom Davis is one of the reasons why I was so happy to have Tom here. Tom represented the opposite of this, but when so many of my colleagues in the Senate and in the House seem to view every problem through the lens of a Democrat or Republican hat, when our country's got so many enormous challenges, it's refreshing to have somebody like Tom Davis, who his whole career exhibited that willingness to put Virginia, to put our country first. And Lord knows we could use a bit more of that at our national level. I also think about the last 18 months, the enormous economic challenges that we've faced. Most of you know my background was in business. I didn't fully appreciate, candidly, until I got this job, how close our country, and for that matter, the whole world, came in the fall of 2008 and in the beginnings of 2009 to a complete financial collapse. I spent a career, 20 years, around the markets, and I thought I understood the financial system, and I realized as I was on the banking committee and kind of dug into this that my understanding was only superficially deep, and that the kind of insidious nature of over-leverage and creation of a whole series of financial instruments that were supposed to be about lowering the price of risk, when in reality they were more about fee generation and putting together an enormously interconnected house of cards in our whole financial system, really led to this enormous recession that we're still climbing out of. And I'm not here to appoint blame. I think there was plenty of blame from policymakers to politicians to, frankly, most of us. I think the American consumer, when they get mad at the politicians, sometimes ought to look themselves in the mirror as well and realize we all got over-leveraged. Many of us got into homes we couldn't afford to pay for. We ended up racking up debt that couldn't be dealt with. And now we're digging out of that. And, those of us, we are in a certain way, though, blessed here in the greater Washington area. I know it's been said that when Washington sneezes, Northern Virginia catches a cold. And perhaps some of you have felt that cold, but I also think there's that other saying that, Northern Virginia has a rich uncle. It's called Uncle Sam. And one of the things I wanted to do today by holding this conference was, in this kind of changing climate around government contracting and procurement, to make sure that we could try to bring those agencies here where you get a chance to hear from them directly, get your questions answered, interact with leaders in this field, and recognize that the kind of dynamics are changing. We are still, I think, enormously blessed to be here. This region, Greater Capital Region, actually receives 15 cents of every dollar the federal government spends on goods and services worldwide. Most other communities around the country would love to have those numbers. Government contractors represent 19% of our regional GDP. Dr. Stephen Fuller from GMU has indicated that our region, even with the decline in spending in Iraq and Afghanistan, will weather this storm virtually better than any other region around the country. And if we think from my parochial standpoint, more Virginia-wise, I know some of you may be from D.C. and Maryland, but from a Virginia parochial standpoint, defense spending accounts for about 900,000 Virginia jobs, close to 1 in 5 in the state. So we are better positioned than virtually any other region to kind of weather this storm as we dig out of this over-leveraged position in our economy. That's the good news. The bad news is we're probably not going to get back to the 2005, 2006, 2007 time frame from an overall credit standpoint, government contracting standpoint, government spend standpoint at any time in the foreseeable future. So we've got to recognize we've got this changing world. Now, again, we continue to have good news for the region. I think it was great news that SAIC moved their corporate headquarters here. I think it was great news, the announcement just this week that Northrop Grumman chose a Virginia location. I remember first making the pitch to Ron Sugar and the Northrop Grumman leadership team back in 2002. It took us 8 years to get him here, but I'm glad they finally made the right choice and got out of California. It's great to be just a regional and local guy anymore, not a national guy. I can say that about California's budget and their tax codes. But I also know that a number of you are here, and I've had this concern expressed to me over the last 18 months because you're concerned about the kind of noise and messaging you hear from the administration. We've all heard about what you've read in the press about the Pentagon's plans to downsize our contractor force or insource over 30,000 contractor jobs. We've all heard Secretary Gates's, I think, true and I think important commitment to taking a fresh look at everything inside the defense budget and recognizing that the spend numbers that we saw even as recently as the last 4 or 5 years probably aren't going to be maintained. There's going to be a debate that we've not, that's not really taken place in I think as full-fleshed and as transparent a way as it should about the whole question of what are inherently governmental functions and who should fill those functions, whether it should be inside government or contractors. I think we have to acknowledge that the days of $200 billion supplementals are past and probably not going to come back. I'm on the Senate Budget Committee, and I am very much, as somebody who spent a career both in business and hopefully my tenure as governor, recognizing that you've got to have a healthy balance sheet. America's balance sheet is not very healthy right now, and I was proud to be a big supporter, and I think Congressman Davis was as well when he was in Congress, of putting together a kind of a bipartisan entitlement commission that would look at everything on the spend and the revenue side to try to put us back on the path towards deficit neutrality. We can't leave our kids and grandkids with the kind of balance sheet we've got right now. That's going to mean that kind of the business as usual framework that has been around is going to be transformed. And I also appreciate that that our Virginia delegation, when Tom Davis and John Warner both chose to retire, that they, particularly the contractor community, lost their two best voices in Washington. And I think part of my job is to try in some small way to fill in both Tom and John Warner's shoes. And I hope you will view me and my office as an advocate for this industry, for contractors writ large. I know how important, I know the quality of work you do. I don't come with my bias is going to be always in favor of taxpayer value. So if you can do the job better, more efficiently, cheaper, you're always going to have me. I don't come with a bias that says everything needs to be insourced or outsourced. And I hope we'll be that voice as we kind of have that conversation with many of my folks, perhaps inside the administration, and folks who might bring another bias to the table. But what we're hoping to do today in this conference is not only get you to that exposure to the government agencies, but also to have some of the leading lights in the field, talk about some of these conversations. I've already had a couple of comments from people here today, and I know one of the areas, we've got a lot of folks from the defense side. One of the areas that I think still offers enormous opportunities, and in future ventures we probably need more of the sub-agencies here, is Department of Homeland Security. That's still an agency that's being stood up in many ways, and kind of sorting through, and I know DHS is talking about moving a lot of their contracting infrastructure online, and obviously concerns and questions about that. I also know, and one of the things that I hope that we will touch on today is, I have been a longtime advocate for small business, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veterans-owned businesses. It's very important that that piece of the contracting pie, I believe, remains stable and gets the kind of support they need. And again, I hope that you will share with both me and my office ways that we can improve that. I would also add one other item that's not a topic for today, but it's one that independently I'm working on, and many of you are small businesses, and that is trying to make sure that small business credit becomes more available. When we think about the economy today versus a year ago, or even more so 14 months ago, if we were having this conference in, let's say, May or April of 2009, when the Dow was at 6,500 and we were losing 700,000 jobs a month, we just had 6.5% of our GDP decline in the previous quarter, and we weren't sure that we were going to see any money back from the financial bailout bill, the so-called TARP funds. I think if we were having that conference and you were saying, okay, would you take an economy 13, 14 months later where the Dow was floating between 10,000 and 11,000, where we'd seen 2 quarters of positive growth, where we'd started to see job growth creep on the private sector side into net positive, and we'd seen 80 cents on the dollar back on TARP, that would have been viewed as wildly optimistic. And as kind of inefficient as both the stimulus and the TARP have been, one by Bush, one by Obama, I think history will treat them both as necessary in terms of filling in this gap when the economy took a large plunge. I know that's not politically popular to say, but I think the facts will bear that out, at least on a historical basis. But all those facts are fine if you're a large cap company, but if you're a small business and you're trying to get a new loan, or you're trying to get your credit line renewed, and your small or mid-sized bank isn't giving you that renewal, then all that goes for naught. And one of the things that we're working on right now, and I have been very disappointed with the administration's kind of slow move on this, and frankly both the Republican and Democratic leadership in the Congress slow move on this, is to juice up some of our SBA activities, which has actually done a very, very good job over the last 15 months, and we've allowed some of those programs to kind of fall off the cliff. They need to be reinvested. And a program that I've initiated based on something that's already in 25 states, including Virginia, called the Capital Access Program, that would take that marginal credit that might have been a great credit for the last 10 years, but now, based on cash flows or real estate collateral, might be not looking as good, and create basically a program where you might be charged a couple extra points. The federal government would match those couple extra points. You got a $100,000 loan, you might have a $6,000 separate loss reserve pool that would then be aggregated into a larger loss reserve pool. So if you do $100 million worth of lending, you got $6 million of extra reserves. So that would take that without a lot of bureaucracy and allow the banks to move into lending this area. We've got a couple $2 billion in a small business lending program that's actually on the floor this week that hopefully will get some bipartisan support and provide some immediate relief on the credit facility side. Because even if you get that contract, if you've got those cash flow problems and you can't get the access to credit, then again, we're not going to be as successful as we need to be. So my thanks again for everyone being here. My hope is that you will view me as that asset to be an advocate for the contracting community here in Northern Virginia and the region. I hope you also view me as somebody who's going to continue to focus on these small business lending issues. Tomorrow, actually, we're having another from I chair budget committee task force on government performance. We're going to be looking at government contracting and, again, trying to make the case that the value add that many of you add to delivery of services. So enormous challenges, but also I think still great opportunities. And I will close before I get into the introduction of our keynote speaker with an acknowledgement that the attitude right now about kind of politics in our country is as bleak as it's been since I've been involved in politics. I would hope we would not succumb to that. This country is still the greatest country in the world. It still has an economy that's larger than any in the world. We still have a free market system that will best anyone. And as we've seen with some of the recent meltdowns in Europe, our financial system is still outdistances any other country in the world. But if we're going to solve our country's problems, it is going to require the folks you hire, at least at the federal level, to kind of check their Democrat and Republican hats at the door and put on their American hat as we try to wrestle through issues of national security, as we try to wrestle through issues of deficit, as we try to wrestle through issues of trying to sort through value for our taxpayers. And I look to you as partners and allies in those discussions. And again, I thank you all for your presence here today. I thank you all for what you do for our country.